Okay, so hopefully the PowerPoint slide has come up on your screen with the heading of today's session on Explain Everything. And what I'd like to first say is we cover a whole range of technologies here at SERU, and one of them that we do talk a lot about when it comes to supporting students with learning, with their learning, is the app Explain Everything. The reason we do like to talk about it is that it's one of those really open-ended, powerful tools where you can differentiate the curriculum, and also you can also differentiate not just the teaching and learning, the teaching component, but also student learning and how students demonstrate what they learn. So it's a very powerful tool to support students who perhaps maybe have challenges with literacy, and particularly more formal written communication development. And so it does make for a tool that students can engage with for learning, but also engage with to document their learning, and that captured learning can actually be assessed by teachers. So we'll unpack all that during this time. Now, we have scheduled, I think, a very lengthy amount of time for this webinar because technology does have a habit of biting us. But we're hoping to finish well before the scheduled finish time. But let's get through, get going. We've got a bit of content to get through. So as I said in my little introduction, the reason we do talk a lot about Explain Everything with educators and families is that it enables, it's a technology that enables students to have scaffolded learning experiences, and also remove those barriers where they can process concepts, ideas, language, and be able to work through that at their pace. We also, like I said, encourage the use of Explain Everything for students to demonstrate what they know, and we'll cover that in shortly. So before we actually go through those two main themes of teacher use and student use, let's just quickly go and have a quick look at what actually Explain Everything is, just in case you haven't come across it. Even though it is perhaps one of the most popular apps in educator circles around the world, of course, it's people may not necessarily be aware of what it can do. So think of it as a screen capturing technology, much like what comes with the interactive whiteboard, where you can tap a record button in the software, and whatever you bring in onto the canvas, whether it's images or whether you write text or draw lines and annotate diagrams, all of that gets put onto the board, onto the canvas, is captured, and when you're finished, you can save that, and it saves it as a video to play back. And of course, during that time, students can, or teachers for that matter as well, can narrate what they're doing, what process they're recording on the screen. And they can do that as they're writing and annotating, or if students need to, they can record, annotate, then go back, go back along the timeline, press record, and then verbalize what's happening on the screen. So there are two ways to add narration. You can add it as you go along, or you can always go back later and add it later. So let's take a quick look so you visually what that looks like. And so what I'm going to do shortly is I'm going to flick over to my iPad, and I'm going to show you how Explain Everything works and some key tips too. So this is a quick a snapshot of it. So let's just quickly go through.
While Jim's doing that, I'd like to welcome Beck back to the team. Now, Beck, we've just explained just in the intro that this is recorded. So we've muted everybody and no videos are going to be used. If you wanted to chat to us during the time, then just go to the little chat room down the bottom of the toolbar. Any questions you can just send through there. So welcome aboard from Port Lincoln.
Okay, now. Here we are. You share, and what I'll do is I'll just connect. Okay, I've just realised this computer is our new one that we haven't used yet for a webinar. So, okay.
There we go.
Okay. There we are. Okay, as I said, we did allow additional time for this webinar event, and here we are. So hopefully you can now see specifically my iPad on your screen. Now, what we're going to do is quickly going to explain everything, and as I said, I'm going to quickly demonstrate just a couple of core concepts. So when you do start up the app, you can see you have 3 choices. You can choose files like documents, images to bring in to start with, templates, but firstly we're just going to start with a blank canvas just to give you a quick snapshot of how the program works. So you can see a blank canvas here. We have got drawing tools that we can choose from, and what I can do is there's also a red record button down the bottom with the microphone icon. But before I press record, I'm just going to quickly demo an addition sum that perhaps requires exchanging of tens and units. And let's just put something in there that we can record with. I'll put a T and a U at the top for tens and units. Excuse the rush and the poor handwriting, but I'm just doing this as a demonstration. So now what I'm going to do is actually tap the pointer button, and I've made that an object that I can actually make a bit smaller now because I might want to put additional sums on the screen. So when I go back to my to my pencil tool now, I might just change to blue. So here in this instance, I can press the record button and start to verbalize working out how I solve this problem. So I'll tap the record button and go through the process. So 4 units and 7 units is 11. 1 unit and a 10 will carry on the doorstep of the tens column. And I'll add all the tens. 3 and 1 is 4, and 1 on doorstep makes 5. And once I press stop, so you can see there's my timeline that's appeared at the bottom that shows 17 seconds. Took a while to do that, but let's go back to the beginning and we'll just play that back. And so you can see it starts from the beginning. So 4 units and 7 units is 11. 1 unit and a 10 will carry on the doorstep of the tens column. And I'll add all the tens. 3 and 1 is 4, and 1 on doorstep makes 5. Okay, so there you go. So there's a quick snapshot where you start with a blank canvas, and you can type. You can bring in sensors, text. If you don't want to do it by handwriting. Alternatively, what we could have done with this one is if this particular sum was on a worksheet or textbook, we could have used the iPad to photograph this sum and then gone into our menu and add the picture from here, and we'd have a photograph of that sum from the textbook, and that would be our layer. And then we can annotate, record the sum over the top of it and do our recording. So you can see how even at the very standard basic level of a blank canvas, you do have at your disposal some really great tools to capture a process of involving learning. Okay. So besides putting in sums, we could actually explain everything in other ways to bring in an image. So for example, it might be, if we go into a new project, that I might like to choose a picture where, oh, we won't take a photograph, sorry. We'll just find an existing image. Let's go to the camera roll. Let's say we're looking at the circulatory system, and we might want to look at how blood gets oxygenated. We can find an image, bring it in. If I wish, if I don't want to have that white canvas around it, I can actually draw around it to remove all that white space as well. So the reason I'm showing this is because when I apply it and done, there's my image, which I can bring in. But I use that method if I find coins on the web, because I'll have a square canvas around them. I can draw a circle around the coin and bring in a whole number of coins onto the canvas, and then students have got interactive images that they can use to make up sums to a certain value and so on. But here, in this instance, we can make the image in place. A little tip for you. So as I said, whenever you bring an object into Explain Everything, if that's where you want it to stay, it's best to then go and tap on another tool and then back again, because then that keeps it as a separate object. Okay. If I add another picture, and without doing that, it'll join the two pictures together and make it one object. So you have to keep remembering to flick between the toolbars, so that way Explain Everything knows you want each object you brought in to be a separate entity. Okay. So besides talking about the lungs, so here with the lungs, what we can now do is we can actually go to the drawing tools, and this time we might actually record as we're talking, to highlight where blood comes in as deoxygenated blood, and where it goes out back into the body through the atrium as oxygenated blood. Each of these, if I tap on the pointer finger, you can see now all of it is one image. Okay, they can be moved around and zoomed. So the zooming is an interesting notion, because, for example, with this one, what students can do is if they find an image that's fairly low resolution and they need to go into and drill down into fine detail, it could be a cross-section of the human body, it could be a map, a location somewhere around the world, and you want to pinch it in to get closer to that location. And every time when I press the record button and do this, it captures the zooming. So let me just quickly record. And you can see I'm pinching right in to show where something is located around here. So when I play it back, this is what it does. And you can see I'm pinching right in to show where something is. So Explain Everything is a nice, I think, a simple tool that really is a multimedia production tool. I know we do a lot of video editing in schools, and sometimes we use very complicated software for that, video editing. But here we can use something as simple as Explain Everything to do very sophisticated productions. When the project is finished, what students can actually do, or teachers, is they tap on the button in the top right hand side to export it, and I can tap export as a video, and that whole project then the project remains in Explain Everything, but I can export a finished product as a video to my camera roll. If I play back the video and there's a part there that I'm not satisfied with and I'd like to edit it, I still have my project, so I can come back into Explain Everything, go back in. I might like to, remove that animation, so I can just go and delete it and start and do that bit again to re-record it, whether it's the narration, whether it's the annotation, whatever it may be. So very simple editing. And it's one of those tools where, when it comes to technology and learning, the technology is not getting in the way of the learning. It's quite a simple tool to use, and students can focus on that high order thinking and all the information they're processing or communicating without trying to grapple with sophisticated technology tools at the same time. As I mentioned to you, we could have used something like a map. So here's another example where I've brought one in of Explain Everything with a map, that I've taken a screen capture of a Google map, and I can snap. By the way, if you don't want to pinch and zoom, but you want it to stay as a canvas, in this instance, what I can do is if I go to the object, which is down here. So I'll tap on it first, and now that that image is selected, I can then set it as a background, which I've now done. Make sure I go back to my pointer finger. So when I put my finger on the screen or pinch and zoom, that image is locked in place as my wallpaper, as my background. So now I can add other things to it. Other things that I can add to it include images on top. So there's my locked background of the map. And what I've done is closer to the Dardanelles Strait. Here I can have a little image of Anzac Cove and pinch that open as I'm recording. So I can start off really small. I press the record button, talk about where the Anzac Cove is, and then pinch it open as I'm talking to give a description of the actual landing beach itself. So really powerful program. So I'll go back to my PowerPoint slide now, and we'll talk about, rather than show examples, I'll just talk about some other possible ways we can use Explain Everything. So I need to go and change over to the PowerPoint. Okay. So as you saw there with some of those demonstrations, it's a very powerful tool for students to compose videos. They can have virtual manipulatives, so it can be images, coins, it can be diagrams of the body, or it can be templates. Now, one of the things that teachers can do, and this is the final point about utilising embedded supports, what teachers can do is they can create a project that has the visual information there, for example, the picture of the lungs, and they can actually embed instruction on that page in the form of voice recordings, or even a short phrase, a statement to cue students into the task and guide them with some suggestions as to what they should be doing to adding to their recording. So you can actually create scaffolded instructional tasks, and the students have got the template ready made, and then they respond to that learning task and record, where they can duplicate the page and then add their own narration. Okay. So other ways that you can use Explain Everything. Look, it's open-ended, so there are, it's across the curriculum. It can be used in all sorts of learning contexts. So if the students are reading a really great book, they can take a photo of the front cover and create just a book review. And in Explain Everything, you're not limited just to the one image. So think of Explain Everything when you open a new project, and we did that first page. I can go to the bottom right and tap Add a New Page, and it adds a second blank canvas where I can add my favourite page of the book and talk about what happened at that part of the story. I can then add another slide, and where I might have a photo of the author, or a photo that visualizes the theme of the story. So it could be something, a location around the world, and so I can bring that in too, and how it evoked the author's message. And when students are finished, it really does make for a very powerful book trailer or a book review. Okay. Alternatively, just adding on to that, that video, whether it's a book review or a book trailer, or perhaps even students making their own story from a group of photos, that video that's produced and put into the camera roll can then be inserted into something like Book Creator, which is another popular app where students actually compose with voice recordings and text, but Book Creator allows you to insert your own videos. So that value adds in many ways into the students compiling an ebook that has their own text, their own voice recordings, but then they've also made a video to enhance it as well. The one I like is poetry reading. I think it's very important that we keep a focus on oral language development right through schooling, not just in the early years. And so for students in middle and upper years, perhaps looking at oral fluency and practicing reading poetry, that lovely rich language and expression that comes with reading poetry. They can take a photo of the theme about the poem, and then, or even a photo of the poem itself, bring it in to Explain Everything to have as a referral, or the text, and just practice doing a poetry reading. And if they don't like it, they can delete the recording and re-record it. So it's a great fluency tool to use to help develop that oral language fluency. An obvious one is excursions and field trips. So students can take photographs. They can actually take video on field trips, but I think photographs is a much better way to go, because you can bring those in and students can then, the day after or a few days after returning to school, they can create a recount or a report on their field trip and turn that into a video. We've already seen the one around mathematical processes, where I showed you that exchanging of tens and units. The same applies for scientific processes. So it could be in any area of the sciences, physics, chemistry, even biology, where you might want to show the process of osmosis, circulation, all those sort of things. Another way to use it is in history. So students can bring in a series of images that are along a timeline of certain dates, and they can have their date for each image underneath, and they can lock them all as like a one horizontal scrolling gallery of images. And as they scroll through, they can talk to each event that happened along that timeline and save it as a video. Now, we won't have time to show you that tonight, but I highly recommend you go onto YouTube and do a search for Paul Hamilton. He's an educator who has done a lot of work in technology and particularly around iPads. And if you search for his YouTube video on building a historical timeline, Paul actually unpacks and shows you the procedure that students need to use to create that timeline, and you see the finished product. It really is a very, very effective bit of media, powerful bit of media that students can produce quite quickly. Okay. Another one, of course, is it's very quick to make a news broadcast. So students can take a photo of an event of the day or an issue on the day, or a sequence of them, and a bit like a newsreader on TV, where we see in the background where this event happened or relates to. The students can actually bring in and create a broadcast. Okay. Now, the last two ones are really worth thinking very closely about, because they really do support differentiation. An exit slip is a task that students can do at the end of a lesson, where they can quickly write down what they found out in that lesson, or what they need to do next when they come back to it. So teachers tend to use a lot of it like with lesson changeover, but it can also be used to have some closure to that lesson, so that students actually recall key points during that time and write it as an exit slip, because it really will help address those issues of memory recall at a later stage, when the teacher and the class wants to revisit that activity and review what they learnt. The student can open the exit slip that's recorded and explain everything, play it back, and help them to do that memory recall. It's also great for students to use to quickly record something, particularly if they have working memory. So if they quickly have got something working memory, record it, not just in the exit slip, but just record it as a little voice note or video note, so that way they can, when the time comes back for revision, they can just play that back over and over again. And the last example I've included, which by all means is not exhaustive, is that students can use it to create an instructional video for one of their peers. So we know that when students are able to create content where they explain something to someone else, that's a much higher level of thinking, and actually they're demonstrating expert knowledge in that topic, in that subject matter. And so in a way we're differentiating for those students who we need to challenge all students at all times, but particularly if we want to challenge students and stretch them, developing an expert's video or instruction for a peer is a great way of achieving that. So I think I've been talking a lot about this, but just we know that when students do face barriers to learning, they do become disengaged. And sometimes the experiences we do offer them in the classroom adds to that disengagement and further marginalises them from the learning. And then they start to develop feelings of anxiety too when they don't understand something, and start to become quite stressed about their learning. And that actually impacts even more. It's just like a snowball effect where, if we're not, if we're at high levels of stress, we can't be at our optimum learning phase. So it's just a reminder, this slide's been added as a reminder about how we need to keep considering that to make sure that we offer students a platform where we minimise all these barriers to learning. Okay. So, which is what I was actually going to talk about next, because cognitive load is accumulative. So over time through the day, a lot of students who have processing difficulties do become fatigued because it accumulates. And we know, for example, students with dyslexia, we hear it from their parents all the time that my child has come home thoroughly exhausted because they're really focusing heavily all day, processing information, processing language, trying to make sense of and summarise what they've learnt. And that's a really big barrier to learning instruction. So using something that's inclusive of all learners, that helps students have accessibility to cognition, this tool is really great for that. So that's where, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about accessibility for learners. I'm not necessarily talking about vision impairment and physical disability. I'm talking about cognitive impairment, access to the curriculum, thinking, engage in high order thinking, all those sort of things. Okay. So as I mentioned before and alluded before, teachers can certainly use screencasting, and families for that matter too, if parents are working with their child at home and need to help explain something in a different way. Certainly, I have heard of a few parents who have actually used Explain Everything to record something so that their child can refer to it without them going back and being on their shoulder repetitively, to go over something over and over again. And it's the same for at school. Students may ask a teacher once or maybe twice to re-explain something, but they certainly won't go back and ask again if they still don't understand it. So it's an opportunity with Explain Everything for teachers to create a short instructional video, and students can go and look at it over and over again. So going back to that one with the tens and units, it might be that the teachers recorded that process and the students are given a worksheet, and just as a reminder, they can go back to the camera roll, play back that little video to remind themselves on which step comes after step 2 or 3, and then they can go on and finish their tasks in their worksheet or in their book. Okay. Now, besides creating that instructional video, when students record with Explain Everything, teachers have at their disposal a recording of the students' thinking. So it makes for an artifact that teachers can review and get a better insight and perhaps a more accurate assessment of how well the student understands the concept that they've been trying to demonstrate that they know. So making that Explain Everything allows students to make that thinking visible. That thinking is now visible and can now be assessed by teachers. So I think that's a really powerful way to gain a better knowledge of where students are at with their learning. And of course, even though it might be, you don't have to receive a video from the students to play back. If teachers wish to, they can ask the student to send that project to the teacher's iPad, and the teacher can open that project and still play it back and see all the thinking and annotation that's been captured. But what teachers can then do is they can create another page, or on the page they can add some feedback, so that we know that feedback assessment's powerful when it's ongoing and allows students to go back and refine their learning they've been doing, and that's how they will get greater achievement and levels of achievement and outcomes because of that ongoing descriptive feedback that teachers are giving them.
And also, Jim, for students who have difficulties with print, reading print, when you give feedback written, it doesn't have much power. However, something that's auditory or visual, both, adds a lot more, more element to it.
Yeah, it does precisely. It does that. Do that, Candice. Absolutely. Okay, so what we'll do, we mentioned that we showed you some blank canvases. So let's go back into Explain Everything, and this time we'll show you some of the actual ready-made projects that you can use, some of the templates. Okay, so we'll just go back into Share.
Currently, there are no questions, so let's keep going, but don't forget to use the chat line if you need to.
Okay, so I need to go back into and share. Okay, so when you do go to create a new project, you can see there we do have templates that we can choose from. So under this instance, there are video explanations, blackboards, green boards, storyboards, which will be really useful for students if they want to actually create a video with their story. You know, they might draw their own pictures in another app of all their characters and settings, and then those pictures of the camera roll. They tap on the storyboard, and they can then just start to import the pictures, the sequence, and storyboard their ideas. Okay, so that's they're ready-made templates. So with those, there are a couple of others, cause and effect, and there's also a Venn diagram. Now the Venn diagram's the only one that can be used, of course, cross-curriculum. So it's not around just using it in maths, but if you want to categorize, you know, different scientific processes, objects, you can use Venn diagrams in all sorts of areas of the curriculum. But what I thought I'd share with you is how teachers can create their own templates. Okay. Because you can actually start with a blank canvas, it means that you might want to take a photograph from some of your blackline masters. Say in maths, you've got some blackline masters with grid paper, geoboard, dotted paper, or you might have some shapes. You can take a photograph of that, or you can find one on the web, bring it in as a wallpaper background, lock it as a wallpaper background, and the student canvas is then a graph paper or lined paper or columns, because they might need to categorize things into groups or into categories. So one of the things I thought I'd show you is how you can also bring in different mathematical measurement tools. So here you can see a template I brought in where I've got some shapes, and I created the shapes within Explain Everything, and then locked them, made them as a shape, all separate from each other. Then I've put them onto a horizontal line, and basically now I want to prove that the internal angles of a triangle always adds up to 180 degrees. So I can manipulate them, lock them onto the line, but then you can see here that I do have a protractor. Oops, go back to my pointer finger, that I can bring over, and I can stretch it and rotate it and use it to measure each of the angles. So what students can do is they can go and measure angle A. They'll record using the protractor. Then afterwards they can add how many degrees the angle was. And then when they finish the recording, the teacher can play it back, and they can see if the student actually used the protractor properly and see whether they understood the concept required of them. And of course, teachers can create this first. So maybe, you know, we know with differentiation, it's really important that we model thinking processes. So a teacher might create a short instructional video showing how you go about using a protractor to measure angles accurately, and make that into a little video. And then students then go and do the same thing. So When it comes to making your own templates, really it's open-ended, as I said, and it's unlimited what you can do. I'm going to undo a few times. I'm trying to get my protractor back.
Having pre-recorded examples as well is really useful if you have students that are away for the explanation day in the classroom. Often we have them going out for music lessons or all sorts of activities. And so it's a very useful tool in that respect also.
And it also helps, it's a great resource for teachers in terms of flipped learning. So if you want to send students off, we know that we do send students off to a website or perhaps a specific video to look at home time, during home time, and then the next day they come back to discuss their findings and so on. We do know that sometimes it's very hard to find high quality flipped learning content that really is specific to your needs at the time. You know, each class is different, each student's different. Your students may have a certain level of language development, and maybe the videos that you've sent them to look at might not be pitched quite right. So Explain Everything is a perfect opportunity for teachers to create the flipped content they want the students to work with at home. So besides a template, oh, by the way, before we move on, I'll just explain to you with that template, you'll notice that the protractor is layered across the top. So here's another little tip for you if you want to play around with Explain Everything. When you do bring in the protractor, tap on the eye, which is the inspector button here, and then select the protractor and make sure in there, a bit like with PowerPoint shapes, you know how you arrange, you send them to the back and the front, you need to make sure you bring your protractor to the front. So that way, and then tap on the, once you've done that, tap on the finger, so it remembers the settings, and that way your protractor keeps those settings. Just a little tip for you. So if you do go to the inspector to change the properties of an object, once you have changed the properties, make sure you go back and touch the pointer finger to come out of that, and it locks in those settings. All right. The other thing to remind you about, the actual protractor on this screen you see is transparent. So we can see through it and see the shapes and angles behind it. Now, a little tip for you. I found out this after a bit of trial and error, but what you need to do is you need to, on your iPad, go to do a search for a transparent protractor online in Google Images. And when you find a transparent one, you don't save it to your camera roll. If you do that, it takes away the transparency and it becomes just a canvassed image. What you need to do is while you're on the web, you tap on it and you copy it straight from the web page. You don't save it. So you copy, then go into Explain Everything, open a blank project and paste it directly in. By doing that copy and paste directly into Explain Everything, it retains its properties of transparency. Just a little tip for you to keep in mind, that's really important. Now, coming back to another example, the other thing we can do is we can make very common activities multimodal. So here I've got a project that shows the Freya model. The Freya model is an evidence-based strategy to help with vocabulary instruction. So what students do is or teachers ask the students to find out everything they can about the word, including its definition, some facts and figures about it, some examples of the word usage, and a few non-examples that might be misconstrued because it's a similar sounding word, or the word might have multiple meanings in different contexts. So you can actually find similar words that actually don't mean the same thing. But you can do that, of course, as paper-based or even in PowerPoint or Word. But the fact is what students can do is they can do it to Explain Everything, where they annotate. They might draw a little animation to show area. So they might bring the shape and say the area is this part, and they draw it and record their voice. So as Candace said before, we don't always have to have written text to complete a task, something like with the Freya model, we can actually just type it in. And we haven't tried it, but I think you probably, if you, because Explain Everything allows you to bring in text. So if I tap on the text icon here and then tap on the screen, it brings up the keyboard. And I'm wondering the dictation will really work as well. So we can even try to dictate a short phrase. So let me just try that.
So Jim's just using the dictation feature on the iPad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the area of a rectangle is a squared plus b squared. I just made that up. Is that right? That's it? Yep. Okay. Okay, sorry about that, but you can see here, I've just minimized that. We have to, this is what you call just-in-time learning and just-in-time. But you can see we can very quickly dictate in a quick phrase, reshape it, and pop it in anywhere we like. And then and as I said before, remember, we need to tap on the finger icon on the far left to then lock that in. And you can see now it's actually, I can move it around if I want, but now I can actually go and choose the A and tap somewhere else to type something else around the model. So that gives you a bit of an idea of how I think intuitive and the program is to use for students. So we've been through Freya models and how you can do that. We've shown you the protractor and the lungs. So let's just quickly go back now to the PowerPoint, and I'll just quickly show you the last slides. Oh, just quickly the science report before we move on. If the students are doing a science experiment in the classroom and they've taken a sequence of photos, they might have taken a photo before the experiment of all the equipment and all the resources that are part of the experiment. And then, of course, they take photos of the procedure, and they can actually record and bring those in and record each slide. Okay. The other thing that students can do is the teacher can actually prepare a PowerPoint for the students. And with Explain Everything, you can, when you go to start a new project, as well as having a blank canvas or a template, you can ask it to bring in a file, so you can actually bring in PDF documents, PowerPoints. So if you bring in a PDF or PowerPoint, if it's 4 or 5 slides or 4 or 5 pages, or Explain Everything will automatically create a slide for each page of your file, and then students can swipe through each one to add their content. I'll finish up with a session to go back and show you a few of those as well in a moment. So as I said, just to recap, I think in terms of assessment, this is a big one for me, that we know that students who receive ongoing formative assessment really make great gains in their learning. And I can't stress enough how important it is that educators think about adding Explain Everything to their tools to have that happening. Okay. With Explain Everything, if you did a Google search of Explain Everything exact classroom examples, I think that's what I would use that search term. Explain Everything in the flipped classroom. You come up with thousands and thousands of examples that educators have put online. Give you lots of ideas on how it's used. Now, how are we going for time, Candice? I think we're doing pretty well. Okay. So, just quickly, we do run workshops on Explain Everything. We can do them at school sites, so schools can request our service, and we offer a whole range of workshops, not just iPad related, but also around other inclusive technologies, whether you're a Windows school or a Mac school or a combination, BYOD, Chromebooks, because it's not about the platform you use, it's about the technologies that you use on them. And that's our area of expertise and knowledge, and we'd be very happy to provide those free services to schools where we can come and run sessions for your staff around technology and inclusion. And just for that, I know Karen's on board in this session. We do run sessions for families as well, where they can come to SERU and get specific advice around technologies to support your child with a specific area of the curriculum where they're having barriers. Okay. If you have any questions, certainly by all means, there's our phone number at SERU and our email addresses. So it would be great to hear from you.